Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. It is our time with Ricky Williams, where we talk about culture and astrology. The show has morphed titles a little bit. And and we're here with Magdalena Valderrama. Is that your last name, Magdalena?
Yes.
Okay. And I've known Magdalena through astrology for a while, and we asked her to come on for a lot of reasons. So first of all, Magdalena, let's get to know you. How long have you been an astrologer?
Um, Pretty much since I was 18, but I seriously started studying it when Uranus crossed my midheaven sun in 2018. So now I can call myself an astrologer.
Good 7 years. And so what are your big three, sun, moon, and rising?
So I've got a Taurus sun, I've got a Gemini moon, and I'm Leo rising.
Interesting. Are you a show off?
I can be. I definitely know how to play to a crowd, and am inspired by crowds as well. I was just in front of the Board of Supervisors yesterday for our county, having to talk about a completely different subject. And as soon as I saw a head nodding, I knew I got him.
Nice. So what do you do for a living?
So I'm a program director and the co-founder of a nonprofit here in Northern California, and we focus on community building. That Gemini Moon can give you a sense of why I am comfortable in that position. Um,
Because it's in your 11th house, right?
It's in my 11th house of associations and, groups. And we focus on community building. Right now, we're focusing the community building on wildfire mitigation and watershed restoration, because as soon as you get into fire, thanks to my Leo sun and I mean my Leo rising and Mars in Aquarius, um, fire brings us together in community in many ways. And I've had to analyze for myself why I ended up becoming a wildfire mitigation specialist, because that's not what I dreamed of becoming when I was little.
Interesting. Yeah, you rarely hear kids when you're like, what are you gonna do when you grow up? They're like, oh, wildfire mitigation. You never hear that.
Right.
You always hear like, I'm gonna be a firefighter, but you really don't hear about the wildfire mitigation. Okay, so let's get to the juice of our episode. So we are going to talk about culture and astrology, and Ricky asked me to bring people on that we could grill about their cultures and also, how they deal with culture and astrology. So what is your cultural background or what is your ethnic background?
So I was born to parents of Filipino heritage. They met in the United States uh, and were part of the diplomatic corps. They actually represented the Philippines in Washington, D.C., at the embassy there and the consulate. So my awareness of culture began very early because my parents emphasized to us time and time again where we came from and expected us also to represent ourselves to the public. I mean, that's what a diplomat does, builds relationships between cultures.
So we could talk today about just Filipino culture in general. I know that you kind of grew up in the United States, so it sounds like you're kind of culturally probably I don't know if we would call it American or like I don't know what Ricky, how do you
So
yeah, what are your okay.
I wanted to just interject here because I don't call myself a Filipino astrologer. I spent time in the Philippines. We went there when I was 10, because before um, a person can be reassigned elsewhere, they do have to spend some time in the home country. So my parents dragged us all the way back to the Philippines when I was 10. Youngest kid was maybe 4 or 5, 4 and went through culture shock, which is a physiological uh, experience. And while I was there, I'm going to drag another culture in. I was introduced to a form of yoga by our high school teacher, and I ended up getting involved and understanding and learning about yogic uh, practices. It wasn't just doing exercises; it was a whole philosophy and approach. That then, when my parents were reassigned, they ended up getting reassigned to New York, which is where I met my husband, who had become part of that yoga group separately. And he was the one who introduced me to the community that we're part of now, which is very different. So and I have an anthropology minor. He has an anthropology major. Um, and my specialty in college was intercultural communication. So I'm coming at this from a bunch of different uh, perspectives.
Layers and layers. Ricky, are you a yogi? Do you do yoga?
Yeah, I'm a yogi.
Yeah. So what's your cultural lineage of yoga?
So it's very traditional. It's traditional hatha yoga. So it goes way back in the lineage of Shankara. And,
Patanjali.
And
yeah.
what's your lineage of yoga, Magdalena?
The Eightfold Path uh, is one way to describe that. And then what I'm in now is encompasses that. And you can some people would call it syncretic. In other words, but it's not a synthesis of anything. It is a revelation teaching, and and I think we'll be able to discuss more of that as we talk about the culture and astrology, because how you use the basis of your interpretation and the use of techniques and so forth really are very much colored by your what cultures you've embedded yourself in. So yeah, we'll get into that some more.
Interesting. So would you guys would consider it like, okay, so Ricky, would you say that Magdalena has been embedded in Filipino culture because she was there for a short time and her parents are Filipino? Or do you think it's more American culture? Like how do we understand the, I don't know, the culture of Magdalena as far as you're concerned, Ricky?
Yes to all of it. Yes to all of it. So I think the word culture, it can be used a lot of different ways, but I think the way that we are attempting to use it, I would relate it most to the fourth house.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of so I'm talking to someone about the fourth house. Story I use real quick is fourth house is like the soil that we're dropped into. And the word culture, it comes from the root of the same word of cultivate. It comes from the same place as cultivate. And so this idea of we're dropped into a soil. And yes, the fourth house is the land, the city, the place, but I think more importantly, it's what's going on inside the four walls of the home. And essentially, we're swimming in our caretaker's stuff. So if our parents are from a different culture, even though we're in America, right, it's like we can feel the difference when we're outside of the house and then we walk in the door and it's different. I mean, even for me, when I was in the fifth grade, we moved to a predominantly white neighborhood. And when I was outside in the neighborhood, it was one way. And when I entered the door, it was different. It was my mom's way. And so I think because that's the soil that our roots are in. And I think as we become adults, we don't lose our roots. We can pull them up and take them somewhere else, but but it's still the same roots. And I think it's always part of us. And I do think the cultures we embed ourselves in, putting the root somewhere else, the cultures we embed ourselves in, they're on top of that root layer. And so I think you have to look at the different layers in complex situations like this one.
I'd like to echo or add something to that as well, that uh, my experience as a Filipino is different from many other Filipinos because they just had to be, I didn't even know what the word immigrant was. I didn't think of myself as an immigrant at all. As far as I was concerned, I was a Filipino citizen living in the United States, even though I couldn't speak the language. And the reason was because my parents spoke different Philippine languages. Those languages were so different, they put two of them on Voyager, the probe that went out towards Jupiter. And so they didn't share a common language except for English.
So that actually informs your culture too, like the language that is spoken in the home, right? Like if you had been embedded in the cultural language of Filipino, that would be different than Americanized English, I think.
Yeah, in fact, when I was in high school, I met another girl who whose parents also came from two completely different language groups, and her English was a little bit more accented, but she could only speak English. And all the kids around us made fun of both of us because we couldn't speak any Philippine language.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I know we use different house systems, but I can't help but notice certain things as we're having this conversation.
Sure.
So I'm just gonna mention them. Again, I don't want to turn this into a house war. It's just interesting. So the first one, and it's a comment that I overheard, is Magdalena saying she doesn't know how she got into wildfire stuff.
Mm-hmm.
No, and the way in my house system, Mars in Aquarius in the sixth, squaring the Sun in the 10th. And then also the Mars in the sixth opposing Pluto and Jupiter, which feels very much like what you're talking about. And then the other piece, if what I'm saying has any validity to it in the fourth house is culture, is that your Saturn in the fourth in Sagittarius opposing Mercury, Moon, and Gemini. And that feels exactly what we were talking about as we talked about the parents.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, even Andrea's comments about, like, you just nailed it, right? That part of the culture is about language, and it's an opposition from Mercury, the planet of language, conjunct Mercury, and Gemini, the sign of language.
yeah, post Saturn and Sagittarius would be like there's some difference in the culture because I feel like Sag is a kind of multicultural sign or like a travel-y sign, and you could say like Saturn and Sag is like there's some separation culturally, and like maybe because it hits Mercury like linguistically or something from the family of origin or something like that.
Yeah.
So how was astrology seen in your house growing up? Like in the culture of your home, was astrology present?
It wasn't. In fact, um, I sort of would hear about astrology from time to time. And then in high school, we had a homeroom teacher who was also our math teacher. So she comes in for the math class and she says, close the doors. And she says, your class is the most unusual class in the entire school, in the entire period that the school has been opened. Would you like to understand about vibrations and planets and so on? And we're like, you're going to talk to us serious? So she starts talking about, and we start having those conversations. And that was actually when I was introduced to yoga and to someone who took astrology seriously.
Oh.
So I had to also then just be able to distinguish the two and then also understand how they are related. Because if you're doing astrology in any kind of serious way or yoga in any kind of serious way, eventually you will hear about the gods and energies and so forth.
So do you know how Filipino culture deals with astrology? I really don't. Do you, Ricky?
Um, Again, we have to speak in generalizations, but my experience um, is that people from the Philippines tend to be religious, very Catholic, um, and so I'm not sure there's really much of a tradition, at least since Catholicism came. But I think about culture, how it interacts with the chart, right? And when I'm looking at the chart from my house system, Saturn in the fourth. And so I think we have to see overlap because there's certain stereotypes slash archetypes that emerge from different cultures. And one of the things from my experience with people from the Philippines is that as a general group that have a very powerful, very strong work ethic. It's pronounced from my perspective. It's pronounced, and so to see Saturn, the core at the bottom of the chart, this is where I would, if I was having a conversation and I was bringing culture in, that's where I would go first.
And it also depends on from where in the Philippines they come from, because I'd say about a third or a quarter is Muslim. And as we know, the Muslim cultures have had a very long history uh, of association with astrology,
Really?
or at least the Arabic cultures. But
Can I
from,
ask what the association is? Like,
Well,
I'm not the most culturally aware. I don't have a degree in anthropology or like world religions. So, how does the Muslim religion interact with astrology?
they have their
well,
own
they don't anymore.
yeah,
It's more.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. It's more in the history. They don't really interact with it anymore. But in historically and even Christians historically interacted powerfully with Catholics interacted with astrology, certain types of astrology. They were against horoscopic astrology. But there are certain types of astrologies because the monks, the Catholic monks are the ones that had access to a lot of the texts. I'm sure if we go to the Vatican, there's probably a whole bunch of astrological texts there.
Wow. So what do Muslims historically say about astro? I mean, what is that? Maybe that's a different show. I don't know. Maybe we need a Muslim person on here.
Well, it's just where it's how I think the history of it is just how it spread. In the beginning of Christianity, there wasn't a lot of practice in astrology, but astrology kept moving because we said if it started in Mesopotamia, it's not that far to get into the Muslim world. It's right there, and so a lot of the this, you're a historian. There's a lot of texts, astrological texts, um, that were created by Islam. A lot of texts. Um,
Abu
I
Bashar.
think they kept, yeah, exactly. They kept it going for a long time. They kept the flame lit and added so much, like the parts, the Arabic parts,
Yeah,
as they're
yeah.
called. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
But
So
modern Muslims doesn't seem like, at least in mainstream, don't really have a relationship with astrology, from my
interesting.
experience.
So Magdalene, you were saying that in the Philippines, a third of the people are Muslim. What else about the Philippines?
Um, there is a Philippine culture, but it's as regionally distinct as any in the US, or you can always tell if somebody comes from the South or if somebody comes from Texas versus Louisiana type of thing. That happens in the Philippines as well. Um, and I know that there are Philippine astrological associations. I haven't reached out to them, but I know that they're active. I've heard some of their podcasts or conferences. Um, and at some point, I'll probably meet up with them. Um, but I'm still new enough that there hasn't been a professional connection yet.
That's so interesting. So I just looked it up in Google. It says the majority of Muslims do not believe in astrology. Islamic teachings explicitly forbid associating any power or influence with celestial bodies beyond their role in navigation or timekeeping. Astrology is considered a form of shirk, which is the biggest sin in Islam and the denial of Allah's sole knowledge of the unseen. But that's just
Uh,
Google. That's not a person.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
as astrologers, we've all studied a little bit about the history of astrology and how it's evolved um, as it's gone through many different cultures, and how those cultures colored the interpretations and the development of the techniques, like we were just talking about the parts. So
yeah,
there's a lot of hidden knowledge just because of the suppression, if you will, or the but when you get into esoteric forms of religions, very often those are the places where they will introduce a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of how astrology can or cannot be helpful. And I think that a lot of astrologers now talk about the being on the brink at this time of some new understanding relative to spirituality, philosophies, and including astrology. Um, I think that conversations like this one that we're having will be contributing to that further evolution.
yeah. That's beautifully said. I think what I heard from that is culture is context, and I feel like we are archaeologists. Right? I'm sure there's a form of anthropology and archaeology, like where they're mixing together, because so much of the origin of astrology is buried. It is buried, and so I think part of what we're doing is we're digging through the layers of culture to find the heart of astrology. And the other thing is, I think as we wake up and we have more of these conversations about culture and astrology, is that we will find new perspectives and new techniques that emerge through culture. But when we keep culture out, everyone's trying to make the same techniques work for the same people all the time, and it's better than nothing. But I think we're missing a whole lot by not allowing culture to express through our the way we do astrology and the way we perceive it and the cultures we embed ourselves in. So I found astrology and I found yoga at the same time, almost literally. I was at my first yoga class and the main teacher said, "Where's your Mars?" Right, and there we were. Okay? We had to start talking astrology. But the culture that I came in before that, I'm Sagittarius on the cusp of my fourth house, is I grew up in a very Christian home. And so I was going to church three times a week when I was a kid. And when I found astrology, I approached it not consciously, but I approached it from my original culture. And the thing that jumped out to me in astrology wasn't the signs. I didn't care about the signs. I had some kind of inner sense that the planets are where it's at. And as I've leaned more into being a planetary astrologer, it allows the powerful religious urge in me, right, that was built into my foundation and my culture to express itself. And I can tell the way that I view astrology, the way that I do astrology is different because of that layer of culture. Another layer of culture that I was embedded in for a long time was the culture of professional football. Mm. And that's a very different culture, and it seems so different than astrology. But the way that I do astrology, I feel I learned how to do astrology from seeing how my coaches watched film, created a scouting report and a game plan, and then we went to try to execute the game plan. So, like those are probably the two most powerful cultures that I've experienced, and it definitely comes through in new and novel ways that I view and do astrology.
I would agree with that. That's exactly what has happened to me as well, especially with the spiritual community aspects of things where I mean it affects even how I work with my clients now. Um, I tell them where I come from in terms of, the house system I use and things like that. But in terms of the advice or the remediations I might offer, I'm definitely pulling from my community experience, my cultural experiences, um, measuring, like you were saying in one of our classes, Andrea, about getting into the basics, looking at the data, and then understanding where that what that person can relate to. Where do they come from astrologically, uh, with the astrological knowledge, and or their cultural experience, because you have to be able to put stuff into words to help them get that shape and vision of what the chart is showing. Um,
You two are making me think about how much the religion of the culture that we're mired in affects our astrology because, those are both existential philosophies, right? Astrology happens to be a technical philosophy for existence, and religion's more of a poetic philosophy. But I think those two, and they do get wired in, so it's like, I really, that's really profound to think, like, if you're talking to somebody who's Catholic and is at an astrology reading versus somebody who's Muslim versus somebody who's Mormon or whatever, that's a huge cultural piece that you have to weave the reading in with what their existential philosophy is already, and that's huge. Now, Magdalena, you've spurred me on to one of the next questions we had for you, which is, do you consider the culture of the person you're reading the chart with or for, and if so, how? And it sounds like you introduce yourself as who you are culturally and spiritually and all these things, but do you consider their culture, and what does that inform for you?
yeah, it's kind of funny. Um, so I have a few friends who, first started with me. One person was from New England, and another person was half Chinese, half Jewish, raised in the South in Virginia.
Wow.
Um, I was able to talk with this person who had the multicultural experience in a way that I could not talk to the person that only had the singular path. Um, it's kind of hard to describe, but since you posed that question to me, people have to have the capacity to embrace a lot. And yeah, so I was much more circumspect compared to what I know that I can address. I would introduce concepts to the person from who had the only one regional experience, but I had to express it in ways that she could understand them.
Well, I never thought about that, but if somebody is
Well,
multicultural,
and that's it.
go
Well,
ahead.
no, sorry, I think we're saying the same thing. Go ahead.
You go. All right, well, I was gonna
Yeah, I was gonna say, to me, that's please go ahead.
I was just gonna say I never thought about that, but if somebody is multicultural, they have more worldviews to draw on than if somebody who's just embedded in one culture. Never thought of that. Okay, Ricky.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, that what that expression is really about, culture meaning culture, right? Multicultural meaning not needing a lot of culture, and sometimes there can be a rub right there. That's a form of otherness, and what is our response to otherness? The other thing is, the way I look at it, it's more of a question. Because to me, when I look at a chart, I'm looking at what's on the inside. And my perspective is, my job is to help what's on the inside find a way to harmoniously, beautifully, poetically express itself externally into the world. And when I meet someone, I'm looking at their chart, I don't know the pattern of expression that's been established their whole life. And that's where culture comes in. So I take a step back and I see Mars in the chart of a man, I see Mars in the chart of a woman, I see Mars in the chart of someone from a different culture, and I'm thinking to myself, how has that Mars been conditioned to express through the culture that they were raised in? It's more of a question, not so much how I talk to them or how I approach them. It affects that, but it's more of an appreciation of how the plant has grown up until now, right? What environment or what culture has that plant grown in, so I can appreciate the nuances, so I can appreciate it more and have a connection that's based on that appreciation. And I find if I'm effective doing that, the words and the concepts and the whatever needs to happen to communicate, it's there because of the appreciation for culture. And that's an appreciation of their culture or them, their chart manifesting through the context, but also from my perspective of my experiences. And if I can hold those in my mind at the same time and have a conversation, I find it really facilitates things clicking for both of us.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I was thinking that it would be interesting to think about, people who immigrate, and they assimilate. When I first looked at my chart in whole signs, because I grew up, my education was originally in Placidus, and all of a sudden that Mars in Aquarius stood out as someone who is acting and trying to understand themselves independently of groups and associations. And as I'll bring Chiron in, a wound in terms of belonging. Well, all my life, I've never felt I belonged anywhere. When I was in the United States, people would look at me and go, "Are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? What? Well, what are you? Well, what's that?" Okay. I go to the Philippines and they look at me and I look like this, but I sound like this. And they're like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
And now I live in a rural area where it's all white people mostly. There's now been some black people and some um, other brown skinned people that have come in. And I still get questions about, with apologies. "Excuse me, I hope you won't be offended, but where do you come from?" And I pull out my Washingtonian, background and pour it out.
Well, and it makes me think of your chart, which has Mars and Aquarius square the sun. And that might be like the culture or community you're in is square to your sun is your identity. Like that square could be like a rub of the culture or community you're in, uh, not against your identity, but like how do I fit these two in? And the Taurus sun is like so steady and stable in all these ways. And then the community aspect comes in with Mars. Now, do you want to speak to us at all from an anthropologist perspective about culture and astrology? I know you said you had some thoughts.
Oh my goodness.
I do have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about Mars in Filipino culture versus American culture. Like, because, Ricky was talking about that and he makes such a good point of like, we're actually trying to understand the person sitting across from us more than, acknowledging like, I have a Filipino American sitting across from me. It's like, it's not like that. It's just like, wow, this person grew up in a really martial culture and their Mars is strong. And like, it's like we got layers upon layers in our analysis. But so in Filipino culture, how do they relate to like the Mars concept versus American culture?
Um, well, I'll hazard this. So to be a fighter in the Philippines, well, let me take this a different way. I had a Sagittarius American, talk to me. He goes, "Magdalena, why are Filipinos so pushy?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, my Filipino friend and I were going to go out and we were having a nice time. And all of a sudden, the Filipino guy goes, 'Hey, come on, Roger, let's go and get a drink.' And he was so pushy." And I thought, "Oh, no, he wasn't. That he was inviting you. Come on, let's go."
Passionate or pushy? You do the math.
Beautiful. That is so beautiful. It's such a great example.
Yeah, some languages are more pushed than others. Like sometimes I hear like women on the bus or, the subway in New York and they're speaking in like Mandarin or whatever, and there's like a lot of clicks and high tones and stuff like that. I don't know what they're saying, but I'm like, they're kind of aggressive. Like just the language itself
Yeah,
is kind of aggressive, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
You
there's
know,
another example that I just picked
please.
up recently where uh, it's just come through in my reading, and then I saw Michelle Obama speak about this, that black women, when they get passionate, they are seen as being angry instead of being carried by the enthusiasm or the interest, the extreme interest they have in it. And it's just very interesting how that reflects. I don't know, I'm not familiar with her chart, but it really underscored to me how even that having cultural experiences really will inform an astrologer on how to look at a chart and how that person might be experiencing the world around them, and then how to help them not fit in, but be able to um, stand for themselves and to celebrate. I celebrate now being an individual. I'm not going to be pinned down. But that was a lesson I learned through astrology, because the chart reflected back to me that, oh, this is not a bad thing that I'm feeling and that I have to do something about. There is an expression of the cosmos that is alive as this. Let's use it. Let's celebrate it.
That's interesting. The astrology does really give us the lesson of individuality. Like I never thought about that, but it's like, everyone's trying to put labels on us. You're bipolar, you're MPD, you're Filipino, you're this and you're like, I am a Sun Square Mars. Blah, blah. Like you're like, I am my own schematic diagram, okay? Like, don't put me in a corner. No one puts baby in a corner.
Yeah, exactly. So interesting point here is I keep going back to like an appreciation. I think of culture and reflecting on culture is an appreciation of what's been done to us,
Mhm.
of what's been done to us. And when we can look at our chart, something attempting to express through our chart and realize how it was twisted, not by anything we did, it was twisted in us because it's an expression, in a reflection of that thing, that archetype being twisted in our culture. And when we can see the difference, then we can kind of separate ourselves from the twist or the distortion in culture, and we can claim what was twisted and distorted and do it in a more individualized way. And I think also there's certain things in our culture, like in my culture, dealing with adversity. When your culture, African Americans, are defined by 400 years of slavery, it's like that's what you cultivate, is the ability to thrive, not only deal with, but to thrive in adverse situations. And so my Mars, it was fun. I did a talk last night, and my mom, she attended. It was an astrological talk, and my mom attended. My mom is in Aries with Mars conjunct the ascendant, and she's got Saturn conjunct the descendant opposing the Mars. Saturn's her strongest planet. And so this is talking about how in my culture of African American dealing with adversity, but my mom, well, a model of dealing with adversity. So it's like culture on top of culture on top of my chart. And we can understand why I was a professional football player, right? Is that the culture supported something noble in my chart, and it allowed me to have success in a positive way in the world. But other things like my moon is the strongest planet, and men, especially black men, are not supposed to be sensitive. And so that part got kind of twisted, and it took a while for me to untwist it. But as soon as I learned that moon is my strongest planet and one of 10th house Cancer moon, it's like my life started to make sense. A lot of pain and things that were tied up, they just started to unwind and release just from that shift in perspective.
Mm-hmm. There's this other shift in perspective of that I got from the spiritual community I'm in now. It's called Adidam, Adidam. And the preceptor pointed out, one of the ways that he describes what we're doing is there is a field of prior unity, that we're not going to improve life by bringing all the separate parts together, but by recognizing that there already is this reality that is reality with a capital R. There is this light that is constantly being expressed and reflected and refracted and prismed and on into all these different forms. Well, when you start looking at that, then you start to understand that an astrological chart is a reflection of the light that has been all refracted and prismatic and shown through. I think I heard somebody say that it was like a stained glass window. The light's coming and pouring through. That's one way of
Yeah.
understanding that. Um, and that therefore what you're seeing is that, oh, I look at a chart now and I'm like, okay, that's what the light is trying to do. That's what the shape is coming through. I couldn't necessarily see it by by looking at the person. The chart gives me another perspective, and that's what's so interesting. Now we're talking about perspectives. One perspective is looking at the person as a body. Another perspective is looking at them as their chart shows them. And suddenly, you're starting to see a little bit more of the expanse of what this individual represents, and then there they are in relationship to you, in relationship to the world, and then relationship to their entire environment. And like you're saying, Ricky, all these layers on layers, and what they're capable of understanding, grasping, expressing. Maybe not now, maybe 40 years from now. Um, it's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at my teacher's chart
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh my God, not only is his human body the expression of the divine, his chart is. You can actually see some of that. And a Vedic astrologer once did a whole analysis, and it's published, and said, one or two of these, I don't even know what the terms are because I'm not a Vedic astrologer. There's one or two of these you might show up in a prominent or accomplished teacher, but this guy has dozens.
Dang.
So I'm like, okay, I still don't know Vedic astrology, and one day I will study all that,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
it's validation.
Were you gonna say something,
Yeah.
Ricky?
So you said yeah, it's not about people can or cannot and when. I think for me, it's the appreciation of how they can express it. Because part of it is thinking, okay, is about, like if you think of a culture, is more like how does this culture express Mars? Because it is gonna have a form of a loud expression. It has to. Maybe I think the critique is that some planetary energies don't have a lot of range of ways that can be expressed. They can only be expressed in this little area, and if you don't happen to fit that, then you might internalize that I can't express this, but that's not true. It's only I can't express this through this cultural structure. But and this is the beauty of the ninth house. But right, tell someone go experience other cultures, and you'll see there's different ways that they can express. Like if I'm talking to a woman who's born in the South and she was trained to be a Southern Belle and she has a powerful Mars, you say go spend some time in Italy or Spain and just go to dinner and watch how the women act.
Hmm.
Right? And they're going to come back changed. They're going to come back changed.
You guys keep making me think of a cake, like like maybe your chart is like the cake part, and then the culture that you grew up in is like the frosting. It's all kind of
Mhm.
embedded. You guys keep saying layers upon layers, but it's like maybe it's like if it's the same chart in a different culture, it's like the frosting's different. You know what I mean? It's like a
Yeah.
chocolate frosting or a white frosting. But I want to ask you guys a poignant question here. Do you think that because people think they can identify Ricky's ethnic background, versus Magdalena's is hard to pinpoint. Does that change people's response to somebody if they can't figure out the culture in which you were embedded in versus when they think they can?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't answer that from an astrological lens, but it's life, so it definitely carries over to someone's perspective. And I think the judging we do about who someone is, and one of the main pieces, gender, ethnicity, I think that's all done on the unconscious level. And I think when the mind, or we can't, it doesn't register as what culture, it's just a piece of data that the unconscious mind can't really utilize. And so I do think it makes some kind of difference.
Yeah, that's when people label you. The
Yeah.
confused mind says no.
Yeah.
Since they can't figure out what it actually is, they'll just put it into whatever unconscious label they have in the moment.
Yeah. So even this to me, like those words are it's right. That I try to tell my students that the chart does not describe the person. The chart describes the person's life. And so just because I spend all day looking at charts and listening to people talk, I hear people speaking their charts. And they don't say, I am this, I am this. They tell stories from their life that are expressions of the chart. And someone
Yeah.
who has Mercury and the moon opposing Saturn, right? They're going to attract experiences with people that do have that kind of closed-mindedness, right? Because there has
Yeah.
to be something to oppose the Mercury and the moon in Gemini. And this is karmic because the Mercury and moon in Gemini are conjunct the South Node. So it's a powerful theme, powerful theme. And we can see that that theme is manifesting through culture, right? Because this opposition is going to play out somehow in the life. And a major factor in how the opposition plays out is culture.
It's kind of funny, we one of the things we like to watch is Chef's Table. So you have these very famous chefs from many different cultures. And I don't know if you guys go through this, but you meet somebody or whatever, and you hear them talking, you're like, wow, I'd like to see that chart. And sure enough, when you look at these, they have Sagittarius uh, or some kind of very strong Sagittarius thing going on because they've been going to these different countries to learn, that were not their own. They had to learn all of this fancy fine dining stuff. But seeing their early life um, and the kinds of shenanigans that they would get into, you can track those planets in their charts.
Interesting. Well, and I know, if I was just like being like, "What? How would I treat you guys differently?" Thinking that I know your culture versus what I don't. Like, I didn't actually know what Magdalena's ethnic background was, and I've been working with her for a long time, so I kind of just didn't have any frosting on the cake. Like, I was like, I don't know what the frosting is in this cake. Like, I just don't know. So I never would have considered her culture in the reading because it's like I don't have that information. Whereas with Ricky, like I would assume I know. I know him, but like if I didn't know him, I would even assume that I do. So I would like assume it has chocolate frosting. You know what I mean? But it's like I think that's an interesting question. It's like it's like how much is the culture allowed to be informed? And then of course the astrologer might have misinformation about the culture, and that might be informing. I'm sorry that we have to stop here. It's time, but man, with this we're just getting warmed up with Magdalena. Don't you feel that, Ricky? Like we're just gonna just uncracking the can of soup there. Well, thank you so much, Magdalena. I hope you had somewhat of a good time.
Oh yeah, it's great to be able to just talk freely about these kinds of topics.
You taught me a new word, circumspect, which means wary and unwilling to take risks. I did not know that. Thank you, Gemini.
Saturn.
Thank you. Ricky, thank you. It's so good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to meet you, Ricky.
Yeah. Great to see you.
All right, we'll see y'all
Yeah.
next week.
Pleasure. Great
All
pleasure.
right,
Take care.
bye.
All righty.